The Bathysphere by Julius Black. Read by David Greene. Copyright 2019 by Julius Black. What human beings can be, they must be. Abraham Maslow. Carcharodon. Chapter 1. The reds of blood and the blues of the ocean mixed in violent swirls carried ever further out to sea by the beating of the boat's rotors. The contrast was palpable. Our one-armed captain silently swigged a gin and tonic as he squinted his narrow black eyes to look out towards the setting sun. Salt was in my nose. Sweat was on my brow. Dr. Daniel Lamb sat just below the captain and was plucking at a guitar with the rhythm of a hen pecking at a bug. His toes cracked as he kicked his bare feet against the side of the railings. The sea swelled 5 foot high. Gulls called from above. I returned to my task. When I flicked another scoop of pulpy mass into the water, a large scale and its accompanying pink slime flicked backwards and stuck to my forehead. Indifference held it in place. Daniel's daughter Jenny hummed a folk tune as she practiced out of sight in the cabin. We were getting better. I continued chumming the waters. My scoop began to scrape the bottom of the bucket as splashes in the waters behind us signaled a frenzy. "Forget it. It's too risky." Dan emphasized his remark with a hard G chord that hung in the air. "Besides, we're on the clock here. We change out the tracker and then we go in. What do you say to that?" I mused that dull option over for a minute. "What's wrong with sticking to the plan?" I said at last. "You could always wait until tomorrow." Dan turned his back on me and walked off toward the cabin, seeking the captain. He towed his guitar along with him. I craned my neck to see Dan's turned back, and him standing there, guitar balanced on his hip. Yelling above the noise of the water, I called out, "Dan!" Dan cut me off with an E flat. "Anything for the reef?" "I wish you could hear yourself. At least the rest of us are diversified." A simple 3-chord melody split the difference between melancholy and apathy, floating up on warm, salty draughts. The music rang out softly and sweetly for the cloud of gulls above, which mistook us for fishermen. "Diving in is really no more dangerous than what we're doing now." "Ha, now there's some backwards logic." "Yeah, every bit." "There's no comparison. You haven't got a leg to stand on. We're pulling in Joe here, Tim. He's a big boy. He'd make a meal out of you before I could even be able to warn you that he was there." The captain called out from his wheel in the heavens. "Dundee's right. Every day I hear the new stories of how men are killed on boats around these parts or have been taken prisoner by pirates. It's on the rise out here. Mark my words, mate." While he made to agree with me, the captain wasn't on my side of the argument. I often wondered what led him into this lonely life. If I asked, I would only be shrouded in a drunkenly embellished mist of lies. I thought of the pirates that the captain spoke of. I wondered what forces precipitated their rise. Overpopulation, maybe? By any measure, I felt safe enough this close to the resort with the harbor patrol and security forces on standby. The upside to tourism was protection. "Fine." Dan plucked another G chord. He paused, gazing above foaming crests capped with the evening's dim glow. He spoke once more as an afterthought, watching the sea. "When you're floating away on the tide, I won't be to blame for it. We'll see what sort of time this storm allows for basket weaving after my work is done." "Well then, it's about time to put the seal in the water," I replied. Dan turned to look at me apprehensively before setting his guitar down and hurrying to the other side of the boat, tripping over a half-empty beer can. A black foam cutout of a seal rose over Dan's head as he lifted it up. It was as big as him, and he struggled before pitching it into the frothing sea. It bounced carelessly on blue mountains. For a moment, it rested peacefully on the water's surface, riding the waves with perfect tranquility until the captain sent it skidding across the crests with a yank of his good arm. The seal sped sloppily behind us as our captain cackled, and the end of his coat sleeve was writhing in the wind. "Navajo Joe should be within 500 meters, Dan screamed in my ear as he shook the receiver nervously. The girl inside the cabin had stopped her tunes, and she was bracing herself between the table and the bench, looking at us through an open port. My sign language was not so sharp, and made clear communication between Jenny and myself somewhat difficult. The Lambs took Jenny to the surface as often as they could, fearful that keeping a young mind trapped in an underwater research station for too long would foster negative social implications. I admired their caring parenthood. There was little they could do, however, to give her the support of others her own age. Those of us who worked together in the research station picked up the basics of sign communication quickly enough when Jenny came back from boarding school. but for more advanced expressions, we often turned to her parents, Danielle and Anne, for clarification. Only a few of us knew American Sign Language that well. The lack of daylight we experienced made going to the surface to tag and retag our various marine creatures a valuable retreat for the mental health of all the residents of Leviathan 2. Because of this, Jenny almost always accompanied us on these outings, something Dan personally took the liberty to establish. Spray jetted upon the bow of the deck due to our intense pace. Jenny must have noticed the nervous energy that had suddenly gripped the deck. She came out to stand behind her father and turned and tugged on his sleeve to make signs and gestures for urgent attention. "Father, are we going to see the big shark today?" she signed. Dan didn't look to her at first, as he was scanning the bisecting line between the two great blue voids. "Father," she signed again. "Yeah, Jenny, I'm with you. Just stay tight." Dan was adept enough to sign with one hand whilst holding the monitor. "Are we going to see the big shark today?" Her hands moved fast, and the waves tossed the boat around. Jenny was always asking questions and soaking up the knowledge associated with the miles of work prepared for those novices who fancied becoming marine biologists. It was never said aloud, but this, of course, a career in marine biology, was the shining light at the end of the tunnel for the lambs-raising Jenny. I thought it a certainty. With her ability to take in knowledge like a sponge, it looked to be a bright future possibility for her. "I hope so," he said with his hands more to himself than to Jenny. "Father, why do you call him Navajo Joe?" "Well, Dan's hands paused while he was deep in thought. He fidgeted with the monitor before setting it aside and giving his full attention to Jenny, ready to sign with both hands. "Well, he's a great white, so you wouldn't give him a pet name, and he hasn't got the personalities of a person. I like that movie, but mostly because it seems he's got a hatchet wound under one of his fins. Probably got into a bad fight with something as big as himself, love." The boat lurched, causing the monitor to fly up into the air. Thankfully, Dan's long arms were able to catch it before it went over the side into the water. "Oh, I like the name Harley. Doesn't he seem like a Harley to you?" she signed, ignorant of the almost catastrophic event. "What? No, he's definitely a Joe, darling." Dan spoke as he said this in a rather afterthought, remembered to sign it before returning his gaze to the seal. Jenny had bushy brown hair from all the salt in the air and sterling silver eyes which housed the vulnerable and charismatic soul of a 9-year-old. Dan's hair was the same shade of brown, but thin and curly, and he had a Mediterranean face with beetle black eyes. Jenny returned to the cabin and hunkered down so that only her little eyes remained visible. "Come on, you big bastard." The captain was turning red in the face, acting coy about the idea of two marine biologists baiting in such a beast. Dan's attention was only on his palm monitor. The boat lurched over a swell as foam shot into the air on both sides. We crashed back down into the swirling surface of the sea. "Navajo is 400 meters. My hands began to sweat as I gripped the rail and gritted my teeth. "Navajo is 200 meters. Dan grinned from ear to ear, and all eyes fixed on the black spot that was the dummy seal. That black sea rug splashed jets of white foam into the air on either side. The cord attached to the hitch of the boat was pulled tight like piano wire, and sang as it slid from left to right. It groaned with the labor of the innocent polyester victim skidding through the troughs and over the crests of clear blue mounds. Jenny bit hard on her lower lip. Dan's left hand slid to the back of his head for a moment before we crested a swell that forced him to shift his hands back onto the railing. Our motor hummed, and fumed great puffs of gray smoke. And I found my mind wandering from the suspense of our great shark hunt to the plume rising from the motor. It left a wide trail in the air that blended with the smoke-colored clouds as distance grew on. I could smell the gas and wondered how long we could go on like this, burning top fuel speed. Flying into the sunlit waters, the boat jumped once more. 600 meters. Dan's smile fell slightly. 700 meters. His smile was gone completely. His beetle black eyes fixed tight on his monitor. "Take us to the right. He's getting away." The boat jerked right, and Jenny squealed as her head bumped into the cabin wall. 900 meters. I think he's diving. Dan's mouth hung loose on its hinge. The captain grinned and boomed down from the loft. "Pack it up, gentlemen. He won't come out to play today. Storm's sent him deep. Look off the starboard bow." I turned and with a jerking spasmodic rhythm wrangled myself across the deck to where I could see around the cabin. Black fingers of a thunderhead, all tropical wrath, grew and brooded, overtaking the golden reflections of the sun as it began to cross the rim of the earth. Somewhere overhead a gull called to the sky, and I could faintly hear Dan yelling, "Don't let up on the engine yet." We trawled on for 20 minutes, but our great white had run deep, and Dan succumbed to Navajo's reclusive insistence. Dan's hands rarely held still. Now they were raised behind his head, as he strummed his fingers on the back of his neck, stomping his feet on the deck. The captain spun round to find the source of the clamor and lifted his voice at an angle calculated to overcome the winds. "Careful with that, Chief. My deck's not so sound as it used to be. There'll always be another day." Dan ignored the captain's wail. He seemed to push the moment out of his mind as he turned to me and asked, "Well, shall we check on your nest?" It had been days since I'd last checked the growth of my hybrid corals, and I desperately wanted to see them. I was genuinely disappointed that Navajo had not brushed to the surface to breach his silvery white teeth upon the seal. A 4-meter-long shark flying high into the air was a once-in-a-lifetime sight, and I had been lucky enough to witness it no less than 14 times this year. However, I was glad that I had more time to dive down into my natural work site without the threat of that ever-present great white. The nest Dan referred to was a demeaning remark to the relative slowness of my work here as a coral biologist. I was slowly planting and caring for a ring of hybrid corals that we all hoped would adapt more heartily to the rising temperatures. I'll try to be quick about my measurements. My hope is they do better in storms than the last generation did. Okay, suit up. Shark's gone, and we'll keep an eye on him from here. I'll give you a buzz on the radio if he doubles back. I chose this place on the seafloor as a kind of garden for hybridizing new corals that could weather out warmer weathers. There was a time almost a year ago when being around Dan held a certain golden glow. His handshake and kindly eye made you feel as if he was indefatigably prejudiced in your favor. Lately, however, Dan's eyes had grown dark around the edges. His charm withered and his demeanor grew cold like a volcano that has forgotten its wrath and begun to dream of sleep. I wondered how much instability was from his distorted sense of self-worth, and how much was over the stress of co-parenting a child in an alien world who has never heard so much of the sound of the strings playing across her father's guitar, or the violin that she patiently returns to practicing night after night. I fought vigorously with the neoprene wetsuit. I lifted a canister of air onto my back and placed a mask over my face. Dan dipped into the cabin and returned with a spear gun. The weapon held a single barbed rod. Compressed air would launch a torpedo, and with the flick of my fingers on the trigger I could thread a cable into the shot. I clipped it onto my belt with sweaty palms. In case, you know. Dan had only had to use that gun once, but it did turn away the jaws of a massive tiger shark, so I peacefully accepted this token of caution. Dan returned his head and triple-checked his monitor whilst I waddled to the edge of the railing and sat down, fighting against the swells. The captain gave me a thumbs up, and I went backwards over the edge of the boat. Suddenly I was in a hazy, silent world, ringed in white beams of light and the deep blue of distance, specks of microscopic decay and tiny meticulous living organisms schooled around the edges of my vision like dust blown from an old dresser drawer. Everything was serene. I felt the water press in from all sides, and I faintly heard the siren's call of the mysteries out in the deep, out where I could not see. Just after the point where my vision terminated into twilight not 40 meters beyond, a black abyss sloped down and out into a continental chasm. There, on the edges of mankind's knowledge, could swim horrors vast, cruel, and unsympathetic. I scanned the horizon for white sharks and any fish. It was a ghost town all the way to the bottom. Once I sank low into the cold currents on the seafloor, I instinctively paddled against them. Rocks covered in thick green and gray slime of algae possessed the rough points of barnacles. These I avoided. The decay that floated about me with every wave and paddle of my palm indicated that I was over the graveyard of a once vibrant coral reef. The slaughter of this ancient world was by the expansive metastasization of globalized society. 6 months ago, I chose this area for the garden of baby corals that I had been experimenting with in my lab. 6 months before that, I was being introduced to a crew of scientists who had become the close friends I have today. Another coral biologist I know sent over some algae that held promising resistance to higher temperatures. This work balanced science and artistry. I lifted a few ceratopia from the surrounding reef, and in the solitude of my lab, surrounded by the humming of filters on tanks, I tried over and over to initiate a symbiotic relationship that promised full growth and no diseases. Now a large ring of thick rocks barricaded my underwater garden from the ragged force of oceanic currents. There I had laid down a false bottom, painted with colors that were attractive to baby polyps looking for potential new homes. The bed was made with grooves and ready to live in dents, painted in pink and white splotches. It was the perfect nursery to kickstart a new coral reef that would be more tolerant to the increasing stresses of our Anthropocene. I can remember my earliest fascination with marine life. I was around 10 when I had a little field guide to the various species at home in the ocean. I would copy the names and information down on little cards and sketch small pictures of them and bring them to school. In the sand were 6 centimeters of healthy yellow polyps, building a mound the size of a slice of mango. This was 1 year's growth of work for me. The long, sleepless nights and the exhausting days blended together with artificial light in my memories. Hours spilled over into days and days into months where I never stopped mixing and matching symbiotic algae to aid in the animal's transition into the hotter, harsher world. To look at this virgin life growing from a grave, I felt my mask begin to wet, and I knew I had no leakage of water from the outside. My radio beeped before I could scan the area clearly. It signaled an urgent return to the surface. I unclipped my spear gun from my hip and put my full focus into my surroundings. A haze of pastel brown sand began to sweep across the stones, and I felt myself being carried sideways by the current. I looked at the curtains of sunlight above me, expecting to see the dark silhouette of a white shark. I hung close to the rocks on the bottom. I dreaded how painfully inadequate my single-shot spear would be in the face of innumerable 2-inch-long razor teeth. Behind one of the most powerful jaws in the animal kingdom, above or below the surface, sharks were always the main threat. With that realization, and fully terrified, I broke for the surface. I clawed my way through the beams of broken light like a drowned cat and scrambled to reach the boat. Within seconds, I seen open sky and tore off my mask while simultaneously beating the surf in search of the boat. Hey, we gotta go, the captain warned. I'm not done here. Tim, Dan shouted, interrupting the captain's retort. What? Tim, I think we're done here. If we don't return now, they will shut the storm guards and we'll have to make for the mainland. Ah, shit, is it that bad? I haven't taken any measurements yet. It's worse, come on out. Dan gave me his open hand and lifted me up the ladder when I discarded my wetsuit. Dan's large feet and awkward legs moved him out of view, and I turned to see the source of my partner's alarm. Black thunderheads brewed on the brink of a boil and flashed neon purple arcs of fire across sea and sky. Jesus, Captain. On it. Our boat lurched forward, and our trail of black smoke made a quarter turn. A green light flashed rhythmically in the distance. The warning light cut hard emerald lines against the black clouds. My eyes followed our exhaust behind us. My right hand fidgeted with the watch that hung more loosely each day now. I could almost see her face again, the way she looked the day she gave it to me. My heart ached as I thought of how many years it had been since I last saw Tess. My fingers traced the golden rim counterclockwise till I was jolted away from my innermost thoughts by the captain's smoky shout. Am I dropping you off at Leviathan 1 port or the chimney? The captain shouted against the fluttering of his sleeve. Better take us to the chimney before you stop off at the port. The mainland was an Indonesian city while the chimney was our portal to descend below the swells into our aquarium home. No way, friend, said our captain from his wheel. After I get rid of you troublesome lot, I'm heading for the mainland to wait out this bad fucking storm. Best of luck outrunning this she-devil. My eyes caught a flash of neon lightning as it illuminated a void between the underbelly of a cloud and the surface of the water upon which it struck. From inside the cabin, I saw Jenny motioning to her dad. Dan entered the cabin. I climbed into a vacant chair on a deck to enjoy my last few moments above the surface before I filled my lungs with recycled air, and my skin bore the burden of artificial light for days on end.